joint press briefing of the National Task Force on the West Philippine Sea that's being hosted by the Department of Foreign Affairs. I am joined this afternoon by the spokesperson of key member agencies of the task force, Assistant Director General of the National Security Council, ADG Jonathan Malaya, who is at the center, Colonel Medel Aguilar of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, to my immediate right, and Commodore J.R. Tariela of the Philippine Coast Guard. The reason for this, joint press briefing is quite obvious. There has been a serious incident in the West Philippine Sea, and this is the opportunity for us to present the Philippine narrative of that incident, sans hype. In the interest of time, we've agreed to organize ourselves as follows. The first to make a presentation will come from the National Security Council, and he will give a general overview of the incident of August 5. He will be followed by the Armed Forces of the Philippines that will speak about the August 5, 2022 human shoal incident from the AFP perspective. Then the Philippine Coast Guard will then present its Coast Guard perspective of the incident. Following this presentation, the DFA will then present its statement on the incident. After the presentation, we will be having an open forum, and after that, after we've concluded most of the questions, I will also then turn the floor to the National Security Council to do the closing remarks. So in the interest of time, can I give the floor to ADG Malaya, who will then speak on what has happened in terms of the incident of August 5. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And at the onset, allow me please to thank the Department of Foreign Affairs for hosting the National Task Force West Philippine Sea today here at the Department of Foreign Affairs for a joint press briefing. Salamat po, DFA. The National Task Force on the West Philippine Sea, led by National Security Advisor Eduardo Emaño, strongly condemns the aggressive, dangerous, and unlawful actions by the Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese maritime militia vessels against Philippine chartered supply boats and Philippine Coast Guard vessels who were undertaking a regular rotation and resupply mission in Ayungin Shoal last Saturday, August 5, 2023. The Philippine vessels were subjected to repeated water cannoning and continuous dangerous maneuvers by CCG and CMB vessels, placing the lives of the crew of the Philippine vessels at risk in violation of humanitarian and international law. We wish to underscore that the Philippine vessels were undertaking regular and lawful in support of BRP Sierra Madre LS-57, a commissioned Philippine Navy vessel permanently stationed in Ayungin Shoal, which is well within our continental shelf and exclusive economic zone. Because of the dangerous and unlawful tactics employed by the CCG and CNM vessels acting in concert, the second Philippine supply boat failed to bring in much needed food, water, supplies, and other provisions to the Philippine troops stationed in Ayungin Shoal. At one point, a CCG vessel blocked the way of a PCG vessel within 20 yards, a maneuver that could have resulted in a collision that was only abated by the skill and quick thinking of our Coast Guard officers. And later on, Commodore Tariela will give us more details about that specific incident. The dangerous and illegal tactics employed, which are evidenced by photos, videos, and other official reports, are a clear and unmistakable violation of domestic laws, the Convention on the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea UNCLOS, and the 2016 Arbitral Award, which recognizes the Philippines' rights in the West Philippine Sea. The Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese militia vessels have no right whatsoever to place a blockade or impede or otherwise control the movement of the Philippines Coast Guard and Philippine supply boats in Ayungin Shoal or anywhere else in the West Philippine Sea, especially when they are undertaking a mission to resupply our troops stationed there. While one Philippine supply boat was blocked by Chinese vessels from reaching the shoal, another Philippine supply boat was able to break the blockade and successfully delivered much needed supplies and provisions to BRP Sierra Madre. The National Task Force West Philippine Sea commend the valiant men and women of the AFP Western Command, the Philippine Navy, the Philippine Coast Guard for their daring, bravery, and commitment to duty despite all odds and despite the continuous Chinese bullying, harassment, and intimidation. We demand that the government of the People's Republic of China immediately cease and desist all its coercive, unlawful, and unacceptable activities in the West Philippine Sea. Guided by the directive of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in his second State of the Nation address, the Philippine government will continue to uphold its sovereign rights and preserve our nation's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and join him in assuring the Filipino people that this government will not lose any inch of our territory. We will never waver in our determination to resupply our troops stationed in Ayungin Shoal and in other Philippine occupied features. Under the leadership of President Marcos, we will uphold the implementation of the 2016 Arbitral Award in relation to our rights in the West Philippine Sea in defense of a rules-based international order. Our position is clear. The award is final and indisputable, and we firmly reject attempts to undermine it. But guided by the President, we will always pursue constant dialogue and diplomatic approaches with other claimants towards the resolution of any issue that might arise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ADP Malaya. I now give the floor to Colonel Nadal, our spokesperson of the Armed Forces of the
Thank you, ma'am. I will speak on behalf of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And the focus of my presentation will be on the protection and provisioning mission of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, involving our naval and of course the BRP Sierra Madre. Initially scheduled on July 31 this year, the AFP's Coastal Command on August 4 proceeded with its station mission at BRP Sierra Madre, the vicinity of Ayungin Shoal, which is part of the Kalayaan Island Group, an integral part of the Philippines as well as within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, and over which the Philippines has sovereign rights and jurisdiction. At around 5:25 a.m. on that day, Unisa May 1 and Unisa May 2 departed Naval Detachment Coastal Graveyard in Barangay Pakili, Puerto Princesa City for the said mission. This mission was actually delayed already because it was executed immediately after the two typhoons that brought bad weather to the I'm referring to Egay and Calcon. As the preparations were going on, coordinations was made with the Philippine Coastguard district in Palawan for the said mission. While the RORI mission belongs to the Philippine Navy, the task of escorting and rendering assistance to the supply boats within the countries
territorial waters and PEC will cut the task leader for the 50 feet platform. Two multi-role response vessels, BRP Cabral and BRP Malabito, were then tasked to conduct maritime patrols and provide security assistance to the RORE mission. As shown on the screen is the route of the RORE mission. And you can imagine the distance between mainland Palawan, and this will tell us that the mission is within the territorial waters extending to the area covered by under exclusive rights. The RORE mission initially reported the presence of Chinese Coastguard vessel at the vicinity of south of Gatuna Shore at 8 p.m. of that same day. But this time, the Chinese Coastguard advanced closer to our country. It's around 90 plus nautical miles from Palawan. In previous RORE mission, they started shadowing our mission at the Skoda shore. So that's where and when the shadowing began and continued as they reached the vicinity of the Skoda shore at 6 a.m. the following day. And until they were at the vicinity 6.6 nautical miles east of the north entrance to the Ayungin shore at around 9 p.m. Minutes later, the Chinese Coast Guard vessel 5304 Block UM2 or Bionisa May 2. It was there where another China Coast Guard vessel 5201 issued a challenge and instructed the vessel or the supply boat UM2 to stop, but the latter responded with a statement. This is a resupply boat tasked by the Philippine government to bring provisions to the troops stationed in PRP Sierra. Knowing the legality, legitimacy, and importance of the RORE mission, UM2 or Iponaysa May 2 defied the unauthorized challenge and instruction of the China Coast Guard. And assisted by the Philippine Coast Guard's BRP Malabrico, Iponaysa May 1 made it to the BRP Sierra Madre despite of several attempts to block its way. What will be shown now in the video are actual footages taken by the crew of Iponaysa 1 May 2. The first video will tell us how dangerously close the China Coast Guard vessel to a smaller boat such as the Iponaysa May 2. The weight generated, of course, by its size may bring unexpected accident, miscalculations that would harm the life of our crew. Next video. The next video will also show to you how they tried to surround Iponaysa May 2 to prevent it from accomplishing its mission. On each side are two militia vessels and of course supported by the China Coast Guard vessel. This in effect restricted the movement of UM2
And again, because of the situation, again, it endangered the life of our people. Next video. The next video will show to us how the water cannoning happened. There are actually two videos showing that uh, what the China Coast Guard did to our people. And the last video. And the last video. Anyway, I will allow our friend here from the Philippine Coast Guard to narrate to you the details of the events leading to the critical moments which will show the professionalism, restraint, and discipline of our people amidst the dangerous maneuvers, water cannoning, and other unlawful acts that the China Coast Guard committed to undermine the RORE mission. We also have deployed Philippine Navy vessels at the area to provide assistance. But they too were shadowed by People's Liberation Army Navy vessels in that area. Aboard the two resupply boats are Philippine Navy personnel for deployment to the BRP Sierra Madre as part of the rotation scheme, and more or less 17 tons of assorted cargoes composed of food, water, and other supplies for the troops' reprovisioning. Unfortunately, only half of the provisions were unloaded to the BRP Sierra Madre because only one resupply boat, the UM-1, was able to reach the BRP Sierra Madre at 11:30 a.m. on August 5, 2023. The other resupply boat, the UM-2, and its accompanying Philippine Coast Guard vessel, the MRRB 4409, were blocked and were forced to leave the area by the China Coast Guard and militia. The two supply boats arrived safely at the NDOB Pier, Barangay Bahili, Puerto Princesa City at 6:50 p.m. yesterday. They accomplished their mission, albeit partially, but, we're lucky that no one was hurt in the incident. BRP Sierra Madre is a commissioned vessel of the Philippine Navy. It is therefore the Navy's responsibility to man it and maintain it for the safety of our troops deployed there. The RORE, as recognized by many countries, is a legal operation being conducted by the armed forces of the Philippines through the Philippine Navy within the country's exclusive economic zone. We will continue the RORE mission to ensure the well-being of our Marines and sailors and to perform our obligations in the region. Finally, the world probably is expecting a better explanation from the China Coast Guard because right now they cannot just hide behind they cannot just hide their action behind the term necessary control because their acts contradict what they are saying. Finally, the AFP extends its appreciation to the bravery and commitment of all those involved in the RORE mission. The Western Command, Armed Forces of the Philippines, the Naval Forces sent west of the Philippine Navy,
the crew of the two supply vessels, and most especially to the ever-reliable Philippine Coast Guard for standing up against a much bigger and numerically stronger force to assert our sovereign rights and our jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea. To those men, your action on that day, 5th of August 2023, was a defining moment. You have shown the world our firm resolve, not just to protect our territorial integrity, but the character and discipline as well to uphold and promote the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Aguilar. I will now give the floor to Commander J. Ariela, spokesperson of the PCG, Philippine Coast Guard in the West Philippine Sea matter. He will speak and discuss the factual narrative of August 5, 2023, a Union Shoal incident from the perspective of the Coast Guard. Commodore Ariela, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the Department of Foreign Affairs for hosting this press conference. Secondly, I would like to thank our media friends for coming here and joining us with this press conference. Coast Guard was tasked to provide security escort to the AFP chartered supply boats. Let me emphasize that the resupply mission is actually a mission carried out by the armed forces of the Philippines, and the Philippine Coast Guard was only asked to provide security escort. The two boats that they use is the Green Hull, the Unaiza Maze, and the Red Hull. The Philippine Coast Guard provided two Coast Guard commissioned vessels, BRP Malapascua and BRP Cabra. As what was initially narrated by Colonel Midel, the Philippine Coast Guard vessels used Escoda Shoal as a rendezvous point for us to meet those chartered boats. No? BRP Malapascua and BRP Cabra are staying in Sabina Shoal to meet the resupply boats. And then as early as 6:22 p.m., a day before the resupply mission, we were able to monitor China Coast Guard 5304 already staying in that particular location and waiting for the resupply mission to be executed in Sabina Shoal. The following day, 050631, the following morning at 6:31 in the morning, we were able to monitor two PLA Navy vessels, PLA Navy 167 and PLA Navy 630. Those are the bow numbers of those PLA Navy vessels on that morning of August 5. The distance is 36.5 miles east of Yumi. In this particular slide, I'll be showing you how the China Coast Guard 5304, since the time we departed Sabina Shoal, until such time we proceeded to go into Ayungin Shoal. They have started shadowing the Philippine Coast Guard vessel MRB 4409 and the Green Hull or the Unaiza May number 1. And then around 7:30 in the morning, there's another China Coast Guard that approached, which came from Ayungin Shoal. This is China Coast Guard 5201. By 8:19, we were able to monitor three China Coast Guard. China Coast Guard 4203, China Coast Guard 5201, and China Coast Guard 5402. The objective of all these three China Coast Guard vessels is to prevent the Philippine Coast Guard vessel from providing security escort to the Unaiza May or the Green Hull, Unaiza May number 1. And this is also the first time the China Coast Guard 5402 carried out a dangerous maneuver to block MRV 4409. around 8:19, we can be able to see how China Coast Guard 5304 was able to separate the green hull supply boat from the Philippine Coast Guard vessel. The objective is to separate the Philippine Coast Guard vessel from those indigenous boats being used so that they can be able to prevent the Philippine Coast Guard from providing escort to those supply boats. And in this photo, you can see how 5304, which is the larger Coast Guard vessel compared to the Philippine Coast Guard, to cut across between the Oneida May and the Philippine Coast Guard 54409. Around 8:19, additional China Coast Guard 4203 also conducted a dangerous maneuver to prevent 4402 from advancing its position going to Ayungin. 4402 is the one escorting the other supply boats, which is the Red Hull. Around 8:40, this was also a photo shown by Colonel Aguilar a while ago. You can see how China Coast Guard carried out a very dangerous maneuver as if they're going to ram the supply boat from behind. Around 8:48 in the morning, we were able to monitor another PLA Navy vessel, PLA Navy 630, with a distance of around 18 nautical miles from Ayungin. By 9:13 in the morning, the Philippine Coast Guard vessel had experienced this dangerous maneuver of China Coast Guard 5304. This is actually the second time that 5304 already carried out this dangerous maneuver. And this is actually the closest.
Which PCGOS?
4409, sir. This is the photo. This was China Coast Guard 5305 carrying out dangerous maneuver against the Philippine Coast Guard vessel 4402. So a while ago it was 4409, now it's 4402. The objective of all this dangerous maneuver, as I said, is to separate the Philippine Coast Guard vessel from the escorted indigenous boat. In which by 9:44, they were successful in separating MRRB 4409 from the Green Hull charter boat. That's why, as you can see, the indigenous boat appears to be on its own, no escort. Because during this time, the Philippine Coast Guard vessel is corralled by a lot of China Coast Guard vessels. By 9:51, almost the same time that they were using water cannon against the indigenous boat Green Hull, or the Oneida May the Oneida May, that's also the same time that the Philippine Coast Guard was also experiencing water cannon from these two China Coast Guard vessels. China Coast Guard 4203 and China Coast Guard 5305. Around 10 a.m., China Coast Guard 5305 again carried out another very dangerous maneuver. That the Coast Guard vessel 4402 has to order to stop his engine, otherwise he's going to ram the China Coast Guard 5305. China Coast Guard 5201 again took advantage of the Philippine Coast Guard being distant from that of indigenous boat That's why they were able to successfully again use their water cannon against this indigenous boat. Around 10 in the morning, 13 nautical miles southeast of Ayungin, we were able to monitor three PLA Navy vessels, PLA Navy 527, 630, and 629. All of these PLA Navy vessels are just stationed on those areas, appearing to be waiting for instructions. Around 10:30 in the morning, China Coast Guard executed again another dangerous maneuver to prevent the Philippine Coast Guard vessels from attempting to get near the indigenous boats once again. While the two Philippine Coast Guard vessels were attempting to escape the ramming, the blocking, and the dangerous maneuver of the Philippine Coast Guard the China Coast Guard vessels, it's a good thing that still one of our supply boats was able to reach LS-57 around 11 o'clock in the morning. Around 12 o'clock of August 5, the Philippine Coast Guard vessel received a call from
position, and I will quote, syempre, ang posisyon ng China
Utang ina mo.
And as we the ambassador was with us in the department. Our ambassador in Beijing also called on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to actually convey in strong terms our protests against what has happened in Ayungin Shoal. The value of a note verbal is in terms of correcting narrative and in terms of protesting. Some people would say, where does that result? But it's important for us to do so. It's important for the Philippines to continue to assert what is rightfully ours, to allow China to continue with its narrative, with it contrary to what we are supposed to do or mandated to do. And the policy of this government is very clear. As they said, not 1 inch of our territory should actually be handed over to China.
I haven't. I haven't. One question lang, ma'am. I just asked one question. The other question is for our gentleman here. Can we clarify this accusation coming from the China Coast Guard that said we are actually bringing construction materials to Ayungin? And maybe we can clarify as well if we will keep the BRP Sierra Madre in Ayungin Shoal despite all these incidents.
Just to address the question about the diplomatic protests, I think it is very important for the Philippines to continue filing these diplomatic protests, no matter what the reaction of China is. The diplomatic protests are for purposes of putting on record our continuing objection to what the Chinese are doing. The moment we stop issuing these diplomatic protests, it can be construed by China and the international community as an abandonment of our position. So this government, in particular the Department of Foreign Affairs, will continue to file these diplomatic protests, even if it runs into the hundreds, because precisely by doing so, we are reaffirming our commitment to the Philippine position that it is that the Ayungin Shoal and all other features which we occupy is are part of the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. We exercise sovereign rights and jurisdiction over those features. As to the second question, sorry, can you repeat the question? Okay. When we do supply, when we do resupply missions, and I will ask our colleagues here to also add to this. No? When we do resupply missions, we are exercising our rights, no, under international law. Because as mentioned, we have a permanently stationed Philippine commissioned vessel, Navy vessel in Ayungin Shoal. Okay, so when we do supply, we provide them with what is necessary for the maintenance of the LS-57. So we provide food, we provide everything, provisions, no, irrespective of what China says. It is our right to bring whatever is necessary to maintain the to maintain the station and to ensure that our troops there are properly provisioned. So let me give the floor to the other members of the panel.
Based on the report provided to us, these are supplies that are needed by our people there to make sure that they have food to eat, water to drink, and other supplies needed.
Yes, ma'am. Cecil Morelli of the French News Agency. Sir, according to your account, that the Chinese have been turning the screw, so to speak. First, they shadow us, and then they hit us with water cannon. They try to ram us, and at one point, they used military-grade laser, as you described it last February. What is the end goal of the Chinese government on Ayungin Shoal and Sabina Shoal, do you think? And is there anything practically that we can do to stop them from achieving that? May I ask Commodore Tariela to answer first?
I'm sorry, sir, but those questions doesn't fall for the Philippine Coast Guard to respond. I think those questions are not for the Philippine Coast Guard to respond, ma'am.
Okay. I think that question is better directed to China. I cannot speak for China.
Yes, I echo the sentiment raised by Colonel Aguilar. I think the end goal of China is for China to actually explain, and for us, the Philippines, is to prepare for any eventuality.
Are we gonna build there if we lose our nerve and abandon the outpost?
Okay. For the record, we will never abandon Ayungin Shoal. We are committed to Ayungin Shoal. In fact, no, if we're trying to determine although it's better for China to be the one answering this, but if we wish to speculate, no, they're probably looking for weaknesses in the Philippine position, or are trying to gauge our commitment to supply our troops in the shoal. And we are here precisely to reassure the Filipino people that, as directed by our president, we are consistent with the president's directive during the SON, that you will not lose an inch of our territory.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Question from our Zoom participants from Global Daily Mail. Ambassador, the former President Duterte visited Beijing previously and had some discussions allegedly involving operational aspects of the Philippine military. Were there discussions regarding the events past and present in the disputed waters? Do we have any information on what was discussed and why such dangerous acts are still being done by the Chinese Coast Guard?
I'm not privy to the meeting in Beijing, so I have no information to share on that.
Ma'am, Joanna Balyaran from GG Press. Ma'am, we've been firing diplomatic protests against China. No? It's been over 400 note verbales and protests. So what's the next step for the Philippines, ma'am? What are the other forum or platforms are we going to use to, to ask China to cease and desist from what they're doing in the West Philippine Sea?
What is clear, Joanna, is that we will exhaust all fora and exhaust all mechanisms so that we can bring to fore the Philippine position in terms of what's happening in our waters. That's for sure. So, but in terms of diplomatic protest, that's one diplomatic action that's taken. A summoning is another diplomatic action that's taken. Issuing a démarche is really another action that will be taken. But each case will actually determine what course of action will be undertaken by the DFA. And we cannot actually speculate, but we will actually say and stress that the commitment of the DFA is that we will, after an assessment of an incident, we will take appropriate action to actually protect and promote our interests.
Hello, Mara Cepeda from the Straits Times. A few days ago, China actually even offered to hold joint patrols in the West Philippine Sea to the military. How does this latest incident and their blatant disregard for our sovereignty play into the decision of the military and the Philippine government in general in considering the offer of China, which is something that's quite ridiculous given their actions there? Are we still going? Is it does this incident in a way affect? Is there a decision already? Will a joint patrol? Does a joint patrol with China even make sense in the West Philippine Sea?
It was just an informal discussion. I don't know if it's even worth to be discussed here. Second, we cannot make a decision on that issue. Third, I think you can ask the people, the Filipino people, on the reaction.
Hi, sirs. I'm Camila Lamia from the New York Times. For the gentleman here, I'd like to ask, when it comes to the RORE missions, we're seeing more and more of Chinese vessels, Chinese maritime militia vessels. Are we planning to deploy more vessels, if that's even possible, or to increase the frequency of our RORE in Ayungin Shoal specifically?
We have already increased the number of our assets in that area for the conduct of maritime patrols and of course to do raw emissions.
Sir, can
As to what we will do exactly, that we cannot tell you for security reasons.
Sir, ilang vessels na po yung dinagdag, and also maybe
Again,
the
that
WPS?
question, ma'am, I'm sorry, is I cannot answer because there are security considerations.
Hi, Sir. Sandra po, GMA7. Sir, there are opinions that the Ayungit situation is already a blockade against the military. So what is your response to that, and what are we going to do? And also, does this already warrant any help or assistance from the U.S.?
Okay, let me answer the first part of the question and let me refer to DFA on the second part of the question. I think the incidents at Ayungin Shoal last Saturday speaks for itself. No, the increased number of Coast Guard vessels, the movement in concert with the Chinese maritime militia, which effectively proves to the whole world that they are instruments of the Chinese Coast Guard or the Chinese Navy or the Chinese government. That these Chinese militia vessels are not disinterested participants or innocent individuals just who happen to be there. No, this was a concerted effort, as mentioned by Commodore Tariela, a concerted effort wherein our ships were effectively corralled. No, so this was like a David versus Goliath situation because there were only 2 Coast Guard vessels and 2 Philippine supply boats against 6 large Chinese Coast Guard vessels and 2 Chinese militia vessels and more People's Liberation Army naval vessels at near proximity to the area. So technically, no, this looks like a blockade of the Ayungin Shoal, okay? Because the facts on the ground, as can be seen by everyone through the videos and the photos that we have shown today, clearly showed the increased deployment of the Chinese Coast Guard vessels. I think the most number, tama ba, Commodore? The most number in recent memory. Okay. As to the second question, may I turn over to the DFA?
Does this warrant already the any help or assistance from the U.S. under the U.S. RPUS Mutual Defense Treaty?
Well, the United States has actually publicly affirmed in its statement and in various statements and at the highest level that it has ironclad commitment to the defense of the Philippines pursuant to the Philippine-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951. And here we deal with the concept of what constitutes an armed attack in the Pacific. But there is no clear definition as to what defines public vessels in the MDT, and there are ongoing negotiations on it. In terms of your specific question, whether it warrants the invoking of the mutual defense, I think it's a bit early.
Oops, sorry. Hi, okay na. Hi, Ambassador Daza, Sophia Cruz from CNA. Just to follow up Ms. Sandra's question as well. You mentioned earlier that there is no clear definition as to what defines a public vessel under the MDT. With the great detail that that the NTF has also shared regarding the recent incident, are we moving towards perhaps a definition of what a public vessel would be and what might that look like, considering it was also mentioned that these were commissioned by the Philippine Navy, they were manned by officers of the Philippine Navy. So yeah, what is this incident, what impact does it have on the MDT, and kind of clarifying what constitutes.
Thank you for that. The Philippines remains committed to the pursuit of an effective and a substantive code of conduct. China's coercive actions, continuing coercive actions, a reflection of a dire need for us to actually set up rules that would guide our actions at sea and prevent tensions from escalating in the region.
Good afternoon, sirs and ma'am. Martin Sadongdong from Manila Bulletin. Sir, this question is addressed to Colonel Aguilar and Commodore Tariela. Sirs, what's the status of our personnel? How is their morale, especially those on board the BRP Sierra Madre and those who experienced the incident?
We are always prepared for all eventualities, and therefore the morale remains high.
For the Philippine Coast Guard crew of the BRP Malapasco and BRP Cabra, their morale remains high. You still have the commitment of the Philippine Coast Guard that despite of the danger, despite of dangerous maneuver that the China Coast Guard would always do every time that there's a resupply mission in Ayungin, the Philippine Coast Guard will still carry out the mission and support the armed forces of the Philippines.
We have time for at least two more questions. So if we can, yes, this side, and then yes. Can we give the floor to those who have not yet asked questions, if that's all right? So the gentleman in the red, please.
Question, Rainier from the Philippine Star, for Commodore Tariela. Curious lang, sir, does the PCG have a water cannon capability? So maybe we can also fire back. And are you allowed to, kasi they're also using it naman yata di ba? On us. Can we also use it on them?
Well, for your information, sir, the MRV vessels that came from Japan are also equipped with water cannon. But unlike the Chinese Coast Guard, we're not going to use that to drive away the China Coast Guard. We intend to use that in firefighting whenever there is a maritime accident at sea. That's the usage of our water cannon, sir.
Hello po. Hi po, spokes and our gentleman here. I'm John Garner from Tribune. A while ago, DG Malaya gave us the soundbite that we've been waiting for. Sabi niya, we will never, or the Philippines will never abandon the Ayungin Shoal. Given the current state of BRP Sierra Madre, we would like to know how will the Philippines maintain its position in the Ayungin Shoal, given the current state of the commissioned vessel there.
Again, the BRP Sierra Madre is a Philippine Navy commissioned vessel. It's an active Philippine Navy commissioned vessel. Therefore, we will continue to resupply it. We will do what is necessary to provide supplies and provision for our troops there. So as long as it takes.
Follow-up lang po. During the adoption of the Senate resolution, which urges the DFA to elevate the China's incursions in the West Philippine Sea to international, multilateral or international fora, senators mentioned that isang bagyo na lang daw, hindi na natin alam kung ano mangyayari doon sa BRP Sierra Madre. Again, paano po natin ma-maintain yung position natin doon? Thank you.
We will do what is necessary to make sure that it will continue to stand there.
One last question. This side. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Hi, ma'am. BBC po. The China Coast Guard just released a statement po. One of the lines says, China urges the Philippines to tow away the grounded warship from Ren-Ai Reef and restore it to its original state. Do we have like a statement on this po? To tow away daw po.
They want us to operation.
Who is China Coast Guard to tell us what to do?
So, are we okay with one more question? Are we okay with one more question? Yes, one more question there.
Can you tell us a bit of history? Why did you put the Sierra Madre on that reef, on that shoal? And why did you put it there?
I think I need to do a research on that, sir. I will I'll go back to you as soon as I have the information. Thank you.
1997, 1998.
as closing, we will give the floor now to ADG Malaya for his closing remarks.
Okay. In behalf of Secretary Eduardo M. Año, the Chair of the National Task Force West Philippine Sea, first I'd like to thank our colleagues, Yusek Lasa, of course, and our friends from the Department of Foreign Affairs for hosting this meeting, this press conference here, my colleagues from the Coastguard and the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the Department of National Defense, and of course the Presidential Communications Operations Office for their support to the NTF-WPS. I'd also like to thank our colleagues from the media for your support and coverage of this incident. No? May request lang kami sa NTF-WPS kasi kung minsan naririnig namin sa mga balita na parang in question pa rin yung ating pagmamay-ari sa mga features na clearly was already awarded to us by the 2016 arbitral ruling and the provisions of the UNCLOS. Kasi meron pang illegal. Wag na natin gamitin sana to our friends from the media. The legal position of the Philippines is very clear and is supported by many countries. No? So we ask the support of the media to please provide the correct narrative and not fall into the narrative of the Chinese government insofar as this issue is concerned. And likewise, let me just end this press conference by again commending the valiant men and women of our armed forces, in particular the Armed Forces Western Command, Naval Forces West, Philippine Navy, and of course the Philippine Coast Guard, for their daring, bravery, and commitment to duty, despite all odds and despite the increased tensions in the West Philippine Sea. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you.
Sir, good afternoon po. Dahil ang food stamp beneficiaries po ay required na magtrabaho, paano nito mababago ang kultura ng dependency po sa government aid?
Yes, pero hindi naman mahirap yun dahil talaga kagaya ng sinasabi ko na ilang beses, yung mga Pilipino naman hindi talaga ayaw nilang hindi sila nagtatrabaho. Kahit na nangangailangan, siyempre tatanggapin nila kung ano yung tulong na mabibigay ng gobyerno, pero kung hindi sapat yung ganun na lang habang buhay, ganun ang gusto ng Pinoy ay magkaroon ng trabaho. Kaya kami